Have you ever been told, make the drums punchier, only to just kind of nod along and secretly wonder what that even means? Yeah, punch. Gets thrown around so much it's almost lost its meaning. So I'm going to show you exactly what punch really is, where it lives in your mix, and how to build a punch map so every instrument hits with clarity, not chaos. Punch is a subjective word. Every engineer means something slightly different when they say it. So let's get clear on what we're talking about today. The whole video is going to build on this. When I say punch, I mean that split-second moment at the very start of a sound where it jumps forward and the attack is clear and the body is tight enough that you can almost feel it for a moment before it settles back into the mix. It's not just volume, and it's not loads of sub, and it's definitely not slamming a compressor with the hope something exciting might happen. Let me show you this quickly on a snare. Very typical wave shape for a snare drum that I'm sure you're very familiar with. But what I wanted to really highlight is this concept of a transient, a sharp initial attack being followed by this sense of body. And so you can see if I zoom in a bit more, we've got the transient here, roughly, usually the loudest section of the wave shape. And then the body follows it, maybe kind of like there. And then you've got the tail out that slowly peters out to nothing. So the areas of this wave shape that I'm trying to get you to think about is the transient and then the immediate body afterwards. Body being what gives the drum its size. Mentally how you can imagine it. Is it a deep snare drum? Is it a thinner snare drum like a piccolo snare or something like that? So that's the concept I'm trying to get you to think about with regard to punch, the snap and the body. To use a compressor to get a punchy snare sound, what you would normally do is use a slower attack time, say somewhere between 10 and 30 milliseconds, is to leave this transient section alone, but to start compressing on the body section after it. And what that does is, in effect, if I were to do this and reduce the level of that body, it gives you the relative difference between the two sections now is greater, and therefore it's not adding attack or adding punch as such. It's just changing the relationship between the front edge of the wave shape and the immediate shape that follows. So that's what makes it seem as though you're getting more punch from the compressor when applying it to a snare. By contrast, if you were to use a fast attack on the snare and catch the leading edge, let's say you thought it was a really spiky, hard, brittle sounding snare, then in effect you're doing this with the compressor and you're turning the initial transient down, and that can give the impression of the body being bigger and fatter and more full, and even the drum feeling bigger than it might have originally been. So with these sorts of settings, we're talking 1 millisecond, 5 milliseconds, something along those lines. It can change depending on the drum. But that's how you get the different feel with regard to punch and shifting the emphasis from the transient to the body when using a compressor on a snare. So with regard to the release, this is where you kind of shape the feel of the drum. A slightly quicker release can bring the snare back up in time for the next hit, and so that can make it feel more lively and energetic. If it's too slow, that's where you can feel as though the snare gets dull and feels choked and smothered. And then too fast, you can hear the compressor pumping or moving. On a snare, a good rule of thumb, I guess, is to start around about 50 milliseconds, but somewhere between 50 and 120 milliseconds, just feel it and decide what sort of level of movement and bounce you want in your snare. It's usually pretty dependent on tempo, so faster songs need a faster release than your rock ballad. Before we talk about where punch lives, let's walk through the tools we can use to shape it. Tool 1 is EQ. This shapes weight and focus. Pull too much low mid and you lose body. Pull too much upper mid and you lose the attack. Tool 2 is compression. With its attack and release parameters, you're able to change the shape of the sound wave. Transient shapers are another option. They're great for restoring attack on a squashed sound or softening a harsh transient. They're great for pulling up the sustain or the body of the note as well. Tool 4 at our disposal is clip gain or automation. A tiny boost at the start of a note can add impact. A tiny dip can stop something jumping out too far. Tool 5 is saturation, and this adds harmonic density and rounds off the edges of the transients. Saturation comes in many forms, from analog channel strips to tape machines. The last tool is arrangement and balance. If two sounds try to punch in the same place, one can mask the other. And often the best punch decision is simply choosing who gets to lead. If you want to see how I use these tools inside a full mix, there are 5 complete mix-along sessions inside my Rock Masterclass collection, where you can watch this decision-making process unfold step by step. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to explore that. Now that you know the options we have, let's look at what punch actually is in terms of shape and feel. Punch is a combination of 2 things, the transient and the body. The transient is the very front edge of the sound. It's the bit that tells your ear, this is a hit, pay attention to me. The body is the small amount of weight that follows it and indicates size. Together, they create impact, and the exact place where that impact sits changes depending on the instrument, which we'll map out in a moment. Punch isn't only about impact. It plays a huge role in how clear the mix actually feels. When a transient is clean and the body is controlled, your brain instantly understands the rhythm and movement of the part. The whole mix feels more organised and easier to follow. But when transients are softened or smeared, the mix starts to feel blurry or soft. Punch also behaves very differently in solo versus the full mix. In solo, everything sounds punchy because it's got the whole spectrum to itself. In the mix, the perception changes completely because other instruments are competing in the same space. This is why punch decisions should always be made in context. Okay, with that in mind, let's explore where punch actually lives in a few common instruments. First, the kick. Punch in the kick usually comes from 2 areas. A tight, controlled band in the upper bass or the lower mids, and then the beta attack in the upper mids. The subsonic frequencies give you depth and power, but not punch. Punch sits higher and contributes to the size of the kick. Let me show you this so you can hear it. So on a kick drum, the weight or size of the drum is around about the 80 to 150 hertz area, roughly speaking. The sub frequencies, subsonics, that's another matter entirely, and they usually live a little bit lower than that, sort of 50 hertz, 60 hertz, that kind of region. But that's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about punch. And so on a kick drum, let's have a listen, see where we can find that on this particular kick drum. The way to do that is just to sweep around down there till you just feel it. So you could hear there, we're still listening to the drum kit as a whole. The rest of the drum kit hasn't come in yet. It's just hi-hat and kick at the moment. But there are overheads there. There's room there as well. So in just soloing that, you were able to clearly hear where the sort of punch of the kick drum lived. So 75 hertz would be a good place if you wanted to get a bit more that chest thumping punch. So let's try and boost a little bit of that. Another area for punch on the kick drum is the beater hitting the skin of the kick drum. That usually can be found somewhere up, anywhere really between 2K and 4K. So let's have a listen for that. So it's really subtle, but I think it's around about there. So let's boost some of that and see if we can get a sense of that beater on the skin. So that's gently just adding a subtle sense of punch again to that kick drum. What would really help in this instance would perhaps be compression as well to really accentuate that attack on this particular kick drum. I like to use the SSL channel strip for compression on drums. Let's get a little bit in on this kick drum. Okay, really simple. This is why I like them. Set the release to 100 milliseconds, ratio about 4:1, and then the threshold enough to give some either 3 to 6 dBs of gain reduction. Let's just bypass that in and out. There's not an awful lot in this kick drum in that sort of beater head area. So what might help is to actually take out some of the boxy character on this particular kick drum. Okay, I sort of tightened up the sound a little bit, giving it more of a punchy feel because we've really pushed those high frequencies, the beta frequencies on the kick, and taken away some of that boxy energy that was distracting away from the actual nice body, the nicer sounding body of the kick. So if I bypass those two, okay, so let's just hear that in the context of the actual, the whole drums. When you're listening in context of the whole kit, you can make even more informed decisions. Felt as though that low punch was just a bit too much, but then still wanted to get more of the beta sound into it, and doing a boost there at 1.5K was doing the trick. On the snare, punch comes from the low mid body, again, its size, and the smack of the stick in the upper mids. At the lower end of the spectrum, on a snare drum, that punch, the size, the body element of the snare drum itself is going to be where the fundamental note is of the drum. So let's try and find that in the snare in this drum kit. I'm going to do the same trick again And I'm going to do this soloing function on the Pro Q4 so we can sort of hear in the context of the kit where that low punch is residing. So it's about there, about 172.5 hertz. So let's boost that and see if we can make this drum feel a little bit bigger. Okay, so it definitely feels thicker, thumpier and fatter. Need to kind of offset that now a little bit. I think it's nice that we found that low end punch, but now we want to go up to the actual transient of that snare. This is that area after the transient where it, as I said, it's the body, the size of the instrument. Let's go and try and find the transient now for the snare and see if we can get a bit more snap, crack, and pop into this snare sound. Stick attack, you usually go looking for that somewhere between 2 and 5 kilohertz. So I'm just going to boost, I think it's going to be around about 2.5K. Let's just boost that and see if we can imagine that stick and feel the snare getting snappier. So what I found was that the punch that we added earlier on in the lower mids there is just making the snare feel a bit cloudy. So you don't always have to find this punch area and boost. That's not what I'm saying, because it really depends on the actual drum used on the recording session. You might not need it, but what I'm trying to do here is just demonstrate a way for you to find these zones on the tracks that you happen to be working with. So it might be that I don't even really need that, but what helped is a cut again in that boxy area of about 500 hertz on the snare really brought out the emphasis on the snap of the stick. Now, listen to how different it sounds in solo versus in the context of the kit. Doesn't sound particularly snappy. Listen to it in the kit now. Okay. So different listening in the context of the whole kit versus in solo. So please be mindful of that when making your decisions. Something we can do here to help with this is to use another tool. Let's use a transient shaper to get some more snap back into this snare if we can. So that's doing the job. Let's listen to sustain. I do like sustaining snares. I like to hear the wires. I like to hear I don't like short poppy snares. So let's see what this can do. Okay, another tool, transient shaper, to change the wave shape of the snare drum. So the punch is the initial transient, and then sustain is the section after the transient that we're able to manipulate separately in a transient designer. All that punch is now making the snare drum seem louder, so just rebalance the fader there so it works with the rest of the kit. Punchy bass is all about note definition. It's the front edge of the sound and the low mid information that pushes the groove. It's not in the deep subs. Subs feel powerful, but they're slow. Punch lives in the upper bass and the lower mids. Let's take a listen to that. Bass, I usually find to get maximum punch is to use a 3-pronged attack approach with the bass. Once again, the body of the bass, the mid-range of the bass, and then the articulation comes into play. And all of those together give you a punchy bass. Let's go to this plugin here. I like this plugin on bass. Start thinking about EQ. On bass guitar, usually look between 80 and 100 hertz to get some more low-end energy into it. For people listening on full range speakers or in the car. On this plugin, it's down here. Just bypass that in and out. Okay, so 3-prong attack. Where do we go next? Well, for me, it's in the mid-range, somewhere between 750 and 1.5k, really, to get that more of a forward mid-character punch to cut through in a mix. Again, it all depends on the context of the mix. You need to be making these decisions with everything else around it. But I find it to demonstrate this to you, it's just, on bass, it's easier to hear it if it's soloed. I want you to hear that sort of honky nature of the bass that's really going to differentiate it from the guitars. Okay, next then, string articulation. I want to hear more of the brightness of the strings, the windings on the strings. So let's go up to about 3.2, something along those lines. You can go between 3K and 1.5K at this point to see what works best for you in your particular mix, depending on what's layering with it and how busy your mix is. Sometimes if the guitars are going for it and they're quite bright sounding guitars, you've got vocals as well, maybe piano as well, then sometimes it can actually be more beneficial to go to 1.5K and boost that, rather than adding more 2.5 or 3K to already that upper mid zone that's so busy. So for now, let's just demonstrate 3K. So if we were to change that then to 1.5K, what does that sound like? Quite different, shifting the emphasis down, moving it away from the guitars if they happen to be busy in that area. So the finger or the pick can be highlighted, particularly on smaller speakers, by boosting that 1K or 1.5K to 3.5K area. Small speakers are going to thank you for that. Your iPhone listeners, your phone listeners and laptop listeners will thank you for that. And then adding that extra bit of dirt or honky grit around about 700, 750, 800 hertz helps it poke through a dense mix. And remember what I said earlier, bass sounds much punchier in solo than in the mix. You always want to be judging punch in context, not in isolation. Guitar punch is all about mid-range and pick attack. Let's listen to these electric guitars. Not particularly punchy, but very well recorded in that they're not harsh and they're not boomy. That's a great starting point for reshaping with EQ and with compression. With punch in mind, again, we're looking at that sort of low mid area. That area really brings a warmth and thickness to guitars. That's where the chest thumping punch lives. And when it's combined with the bass guitar, which you kind of heard a little bit at the start there, it just sounds great. Much like the bass, with electric guitar, I'm thinking of the sustaining element of the tone and then the articulation of the note. In this case, let's start with clarity, with articulation, and look at getting some brightness into this guitar sound. And for that, I usually go between 1.5 up to 3.5K. So let's see where that works on this guitar. Let's just pick a point. So any of those would have done. So let's go with 3K. Now it sounds, the emphasis has shifted. We've got the articulation, the brightness in. So let's bring some energy back now, some more kind of chest, low energy. Okay, felt like a good spot on that guitar. Let's bypass it. And what it's doing is it's giving us that sort of scooped sound. We're boosting the lows, boosting the highs. Therefore, we're pulling out the mids, which is a scooped tone on guitars. That just works so well in rock genres. So let's bring in guitar 2, see what that sounds like now. It sounds very sad when you bypass the EQ there. Let's look at the next guitar and see what we can do to that in solo. I don't want to match what I've just done to the left-hand guitar because difference is everything. Contrast is everything in creating a sense of space and width. Let's do some considered moves with regard to EQing this guitar for punch. Bypass that and bring it in. And then with the first guitar, more about the bass. Let's bring the bass into the picture now. Okay, so now the bass doesn't seem as punchy as it did in solo. Let's try a bit of compression. So with the extra compression, changing the amp settings, pushing the treble and the mid-range, was able to get that bass to cut through those guitars. Tricks that work to help bass cut through are parallel distortion tracks. If you don't want to miss it, coming up very soon on the channel, I've got a video about using distortion, how to set the correct level of parallel distortion on a bass track so that your bass is heard on small speakers. So that's coming up very soon. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. That sort of area on the electric guitars, distorted guitars, that's where the pick attack lives, it's where the string noise lives, and it's where the grit and the details live. And so by just deciding to choose two different areas to boost on the guitars, both in the lows and in the highs, first guitar actually I kind of shifted the emphasis up, and the second guitar the emphasis is a little bit lower, and so that difference creates a wider sense of separation on those electrics, as well as making them sound more punchy. I don't know if we usually talk about vocals being punchy, but vocals still have a front edge. And it's the clarity of the consonants and the way phrases step forward confidently that gives that illusion of punch. Punch on vocals, pretty much the same kind of deal, really. The consonants, the clarity of the vocal, you get that really between sort of 2 kilohertz and 5 kilohertz on the vocal. That is so important to think about consonants, because if you go too far with things like compression, with a fast attack on the compressor, you can round off those consonants so much that you lose the sense almost in busy sections of the mix what the vocal is actually saying, the lyrics of the song. In terms of EQ, low mid power, low mid energy for that low mid punch around 100 hertz for almost like a proximity effect, and then the 2 to 5k boost for clarity around the consonants. Let's take a listen to this vocal.
Keep my head above water, don't know if I can swim any longer.
So if we use a compressor here and start to slow down the attack, you should kind of hear the consonants getting a little bit dull sounding. Can be subtle, so probably best to listen to this on headphones.
Keep my head above water, don't know if I can swim any longer. Keep my head above water. Don't know if I can swim any longer.
I'll loop this. It will get annoying, I apologise, but I want to go between the slow and fast settings with the attack. So hopefully you can hear that. You listen for the consonants, those hard edges on the vocal.
Keep my head above water.
So listen to the K, keep my head out of water.
Keep my head above water. Keep my head above water.
So did you hear that? The start, the very beginning edge of the K just got softer. Cycle through that and I'll change the attack setting.
Keep my head above water. Keep my head above water. Keep my head above water. Keep my head above water.
It's really subtle, but it really matters. When a vocal is in a dense mix, these little details are what help it, stand above everything else in the mix. Obviously, changing the attack like that is changing the way that the compressor is reacting to the signal. So be aware of how the attack is affecting the consonants and the punch of the vocal in that respect. So this concept works pretty much on everything. Think about the transient, the initial part of the attack of the sound, and how that can be enhanced with EQ or compression. And then think about the punch, the lower punch that follows that transient, and how that can be enhanced in the same way to just bring more size to the part. Here's a quick checklist you can use. First, choose 2 or 3 main punch elements. Next, find the transient and body zones of those elements. Note any that particularly overlap and pull other elements out of the way. Avoid boosting the same punch zone frequency across multiple elements. Test what you've done on a small speaker and in the context of the mix. Learning to shape punch is a bit like learning to drive a car. At the start, you have to think about everything you're doing. Every EQ move, every transient, every time 2 sounds clash. But with time, it becomes second nature. You start to recognise what needs small adjustment and what needs nothing at all, because it already sounds right. If you want more support developing your ear and understanding the why behind each decision, you'll find that inside my Rock Masterclass collection. You can watch me mix 5 different songs in real time and follow along with the multi-tracks. There's a link in the description if you want to check that out. The playlist on screen now is about how to EQ everything. It's the best next step from here. Now that you know where punch is, EQ is how you shape each instrument so they don't all compete for the same space. That's all for me. Thanks for watching. Remember to like the video if you found some value in it, and I'll see you in the next video.